Welcome to Feedback Studio, the new look version of Turnitin. In this video, we'll be looking at the overall layout of Feedback Studio and how it differs from Turnitin's GradeMark. For this particular video, we'll be assuming that you're already familiar with the basic functions of Turnitin. If you're wholly new to online marking and checking academic integrity, then you might be better off starting with a beginner's introduction to Feedback Studio, which goes into a little more detail. If you are already familiar with Turnitin, then you'll notice immediately that Feedback Studio looks very different, but don't be alarmed by this. It actually hasn't changed all that much, as we'll see. First, let's investigate why it looks so different. To begin with, the grey has gone. The grey background, the grey top bar, it's all gone. It's almost as though someone's turned the lights on. Secondly, this big panel on the right has disappeared and been replaced by this rather tidy set of icons, which we'll come back to in a moment. These big grey buttons at the top have disappeared as well and been replaced by a cleaner, simpler top bar with a more obvious space for the grade to go. Now, all the things that you normally use are still here. They've just been tucked away, and the trick to getting familiar with Feedback Studio is just learning where they've all been put. The advantage of having everything tucked away, though, is that the window in which the essay appears is much bigger. You may remember from the classic Turnitin that the panel on the side limited the space that you had for reading the essays, and the small zoom function that you had was rather clunky. If you were using a smaller screen, or particularly a tablet, you often found yourself stuck with the choice of the text being either too large or too small. The zoom function in Feedback Studio is much smoother, with a handy little option for maximizing. Just along from the zoom function, you can see that the word count is now permanently visible. Before, you needed to click on the information button to see this, and it was next to the information button that you would go to download the paper as well, but it wasn't particularly obvious there, so now it's been moved to its own toolbar button with a nice universal icon. The rest of the information about the paper has been bundled into this little information button there, and again this is all nicely presented and comprehensive. Now, these other icons on the side represent those same three big grey buttons that we used to use to switch between the originality report, the GradeMark and the peer mark. They're represented here as layers. The GradeMark layer can be placed over the essay if necessary, and the Similarity layer can be placed over the same, or you can have both layers placed over at the same time. Now, you can activate these layers from this layer button, but you can also activate them and deactivate them from these little layer icons at the top of each toolbar. Now let's look at these buttons. Now, the icons that you can see are the same as before, but clicking on them now activates a pop-up screen. So, to see your quick marks, click on the quick marks icon. This panel will look familiar to you. You can edit your own quick mark sets, and there's a nice little drop down here so that you can organize your quick marks into categories and access them easily. One of the nice things about grading in Feedback Studio, though, is you don't even need to go to this panel. Just click anywhere in the essay and it will bring up these shortcuts from which you can select any quick mark, add a comment, or strike through the text. The pen icon on the side here brings up the long form feedback option. Again, this looks familiar to you. You have the space to type here, or the option to record your feedback verbally if you prefer. And finally, the Rubric button. Again, familiar but a bit neater. Many of you might not have had the chance to explore the use of rubrics yet, and if you haven't, there will be other video guides to take you through that process in more detail. Now, here we have the Similarity report buttons. Now, the first two of these are very similar to what we've used. This first one, here we go, shows the overall similarity percentage and an overview of the sources. The second one has a more detailed breakdown of the sources, And from here you can exclude any specific sources you want as well. A nice feature is that a record is kept of any sources that you have excluded, and you can see a list of those excluded sources here, from which you can restore some or all of them back into the Similarity report. This final icon is new as well, and it's really useful. You may have experienced how frustrating it can be if the Turnitin settings are not correct and student essays show all their quotations as possible plagiary, or the bibliography entries account for 17% similarity. With this option, you can easily correct this within individual essays by simply adjusting the filter. You can switch off the multicolour highlighting as well. I'm not entirely sure what the benefits of that are, but there you go, the option's there. The highlighted passages themselves work just as they did before. The colours and numbers indicate the different sources, and clicking on any one of the numbers will bring up the offending passage in context from the identified source. This pages icon will bring it up in the full source as well. And again, you'll have seen this before. A handy addition to the pages view is these little arrows on either side, from which you can flip back and forth to the different passages which have been identified from the same source. Some may find this easier than using the full source options. Now, just one last thing to show you, and it's another new feature. Again, many of you may have experienced the frustrations of having to keep scrolling forwards and backwards in a document. Say, for example, checking sources in the body of an essay against the bibliography. The scrolling can take what seems like an eternity, especially if you've got a really long essay or a slow machine that takes time to load up the pages. As nice as it is sometimes to be able to use a slow computer as an excuse for a tea break, Feedback Studio have introduced this discrete little tab on the left-hand side of the page. Clicking it brings up page reviews for the whole document, and from here it is much quicker to move up and down through an essay. You can even lock it in place in the panel if you use it regularly, or if you prefer to have it always open. So that's it. Basic rundown of where everything is. As you can see, it's not really all that different, despite the radical change in appearance. And the changes that have been made clearly make grading on Turnitin easier and more intuitive. There will be other videos exploring all the other features of Feedback Studio in more detail, and for those who've not used Turnitin before, or for those who simply want to make more use of it. In the meantime, we hope you like the look of it.